A chance encounter. The afternoon sun bathed the park in a gentle warmth as Eleanor made her way along the familiar path. At 75, her steps were slower, but steady, the crunch of the gravel underfoot a soothing rhythm to her solitary walk. A petite woman with soft, silver curls that framed her face, Eleanor had always been known for her gentle spirit. Today was like any other, or so she thought. With her canvas bag filled with bird seed slung over her shoulder, she reached her favorite bench beneath the towering oak tree. The bench, worn by years of weather and countless moments of reflection, was her sanctuary. She sat down with a sigh, the kind of sigh that comes from both peace and loneliness. "Good afternoon, my little friends," she murmured to the pigeons that had already begun gathering near her feet, anticipating their daily feast. Reaching into her bag, she pulled out a handful of seeds, scattering them across the grass with a flick of her wrist. The birds cooed and pecked eagerly, their glossy feathers shimmering in the sunlight. As Eleanor watched them, her mind wandered back to a time when she wasn't alone. The days when her children's laughter filled the air, when the house buzzed with activity and life. But time had a way of pulling people apart. Her children had grown, moved away, and built lives of their own. Now, her visits to the park had become the highlight of her day, the only time she felt truly connected to the world around her. The sound of children's laughter caught her attention. Across the way, on the playground, a group of kids ran around, their joy infectious. A little girl with bright pink shoes and messy pigtails zoomed down the slide, squealing with glee as she hit the ground. A boy chased his friend around the swings, his face red with the effort of keeping up. Eleanor smiled softly, her heart swelling with a mix of nostalgia and longing. She often wondered about her grandchildren, children she rarely saw. Were they laughing and playing in a park like this one? Did they know how much she missed them? Just as she was about to toss another handful of birdseed, Eleanor noticed something out of the corner of her eye. A figure, small and fragile, standing at the edge of the park. It was a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with tangled hair and a dirt-streaked face. She wore a faded dress that looked too big for her, and her bare feet were covered in grime. The girl's wide, fearful eyes darted around the park, as if she were searching for something or someone. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. Something wasn't right. The girl's posture was tense, her body trembling slightly as she took hesitant steps forward. She kept glancing over her shoulder, and the look in her eyes sent a chill down Eleanor's spine. Instinctively, Eleanor sat up straighter, her senses heightened. She had always trusted her gut, and right now, her gut was screaming that this child was in trouble. The girl's gaze locked with Eleanor's for a brief moment, and in that instant, Eleanor saw the raw fear, the desperation that only someone truly terrified could feel. The girl hesitated, as if unsure whether to approach. But then, as though making a split-second decision, she bolted across the park, her tiny legs carrying her as fast as they could go. Eleanor stood up, her hands trembling slightly as the girl reached her, panting, her chest heaving with exertion. "Please, help me," the girl whispered, her voice so small and broken that it was almost lost in the rustling of the leaves. Her eyes were filled with tears, and her hands clutched the sides of her dress, twisting the fabric in anxiety. Eleanor knelt down, her heart aching for this child. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked softly, her voice as soothing as she could manage. "Are you hurt?" The girl shook her head, her lips trembling. He's coming," she stammered, her voice cracking. "He's going to find me." Eleanor's stomach twisted into a knot. She glanced around, but saw no one immediately nearby. Yet the girl's terror was too real to be dismissed. Whoever he was, it was clear this child was running from something, or someone, truly dangerous. "What's your name?" Eleanor asked gently, trying to keep the girl calm. "Lily," the girl whispered, her voice barely audible. "My name is Lily." Eleanor nodded, offering a reassuring smile, though her heart pounded in her chest. "Okay, Lily, you're safe with me, I promise. No one's going to hurt you. But I need you to tell me what happened. Why are you running?" Lily swallowed hard, her small hands shaking as she wiped away a tear. I don't know," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I was at home, but then he came. My stepfather. He's been really angry lately. He hit my mom. He does bad things." Her voice faltered, and a fresh wave of tears filled down her cheeks. Eleanor's blood ran cold. She had heard enough. The details weren't all clear, but it didn't matter. This child was in danger. She had to act fast. "All right, Lily," Eleanor said, keeping her voice steady. "We're going to get help, okay? I'm going to call someone who can protect you and your mom. But we need to move quickly." Lily nodded, her small hands clutching Eleanor's sleeve as if it were a lifeline. Eleanor stood up, pulling her phone from her bag with shaking hands. She quickly dialed 911, her heart thudding in her chest. 911. "What's your emergency?" The operator's calm voice crackled through the phone. Eleanor took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay composed. "I'm at Oakwood Park," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "There's a little girl here. She's in trouble. Her stepfather, he's dangerous. She says he hurt her mother. Please, send help." The operator asked for more details, but Eleanor's focus was on keeping Lily calm, holding her close as they waited. Every second felt like an eternity, and Eleanor's mind raced with possibilities of what could happen next. As she comforted Lily, Eleanor scanned the park again. And that's when she saw him. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, stood at the edge of the trees, his eyes locked on them with a dark, unsettling intensity. "He's here," Lily whispered, her voice trembling with fear. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat, but she refused to let the fear take over. She squeezed Lily's hand tighter, her heart pounding with the knowledge that she would protect this child, no matter the cost. A race against fear. Eleanor's heart drummed in her chest as she kept her gaze locked on the man standing at the edge of the park. His presence felt like a shadow, dark and looming, stretching toward her and the trembling child in her arms. Even from a distance, Eleanor could sense the menace radiating from him. His eyes bore into them with a disturbing intensity, a silent promise of danger. She took a slow, deep breath, willing herself to stay calm for Lily's sake. The girl's small body was shaking uncontrollably, her fingers digging into Eleanor's cardigan, as if it were the only thing keeping her from collapsing in fear. "I won't let him hurt you, Lily," Eleanor whispered, keeping her voice steady. "You're safe with me." But inside, Eleanor's mind raced. The man wasn't moving yet, but his presence alone was enough to make her pulse quicken. She wasn't a fighter, nor was she equipped to face a man who looked as though he could overpower her with ease. She could barely see any other parkgoers nearby. The usual afternoon crowd seemed to have thinned out, leaving only a few scattered families too far to hear if she called out. The operator's voice brought her back to the present. "Ma'am, stay on the line. Officers are on their way. Can you tell me if the man is still there?" Eleanor glanced at the edge of the trees again. The man hadn't moved, but he stood like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. His dark clothes blended into the shadows, and his hands were clenched at his sides. Eleanor could almost feel the malevolence in the air. "He's still watching us," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what he's planning, but he's dangerous. Stay where you are and keep the girl with you," the operator instructed calmly. "Help will arrive soon." Eleanor nodded, though the reassurance did little to soothe the growing knot of anxiety in her stomach. She didn't know how much time they had. Minutes felt like hours, and every breath seemed to hang in the air between them and the man watching them from the trees. She glanced down at Lily, who had buried her face in Eleanor's chest. The girl's shoulders shook with silent sobs, and Eleanor's heart ached for her. What kind of terror had this child lived through? How long had she been running from this man, fearing for her life and her mother's? "Lily," Eleanor whispered, gently stroking the girl's matted hair. "I need you to stay very close to me, okay? The police are coming to help us. They're going to take care of everything." Lily looked up, her tear-filled eyes wide with fear. "What if he finds us before they come?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Eleanor hesitated. She didn't want to lie to the girl, but the truth was too terrifying to speak aloud. If the man made a move before the police arrived, she wasn't sure what she would do. But one thing was clear. She would protect Lily with everything she had. "I won't let him," Eleanor said firmly, hoping the conviction in her voice would comfort Lily, even as doubt gnawed at her. "I promise." Eleanor scanned the park again, her mind racing. The man hadn't moved closer, but something about his stillness unnerved her. She could feel his gaze, cold and unrelenting, watching their every move. He was waiting for something, an opportunity, perhaps, or a moment of weakness. Suddenly, Lily gasped, clutching Eleanor's arm even tighter. "He's coming," she whispered, her voice breaking with terror. Eleanor's breath hitched as she saw it too. The man had started walking toward them, slow and deliberate, his eyes fixed on them like a predator stalking its prey. There was no mistaking his intent now. He was coming for Lily. Every muscle in Eleanor's body tensed, her mind screaming at her to do something, to move, to run. But where could they go? She was an elderly woman with a small child, and the man was strong and determined. The parking lot was too far away, and the closest family she could see was on the other side of the playground, oblivious to the danger unfolding. Desperation surged through her veins. She couldn't just wait here for the police to arrive. If the man reached them first, there was no telling what he would do. She had to buy them time, had to get Lily to safety. Eleanor stood abruptly, pulling Lily to her feet. "Come on, sweetheart," she said urgently, her voice shaking. "We need to move." Lily's eyes widened with fear, but she didn't hesitate. She clutched Eleanor's hand tightly as the older woman led her away from the bench. Eleanor's mind raced as she scanned the park, looking for anything, anyone, that could help. Her legs ached from the sudden movement, but adrenaline kept her moving. They headed toward the playground, hoping to blend in with the families nearby, hoping that the man wouldn't dare make a scene in front of others. But as they hurried along the path, Eleanor dared a glance over her shoulder, and her heart sank. The man was picking up his pace, his long strides closing the distance between them faster than she had anticipated. Eleanor's breath came in short, panicked bursts as she pulled Lily toward a cluster of trees. Maybe they could hide, just long enough for the police to arrive. But deep down, she knew it was a flimsy plan at best. The man had seen them, and hiding wouldn't keep them safe for long. They reached the trees, and Eleanor quickly led Lily behind a large oak. The leaves rustled around them, offering some cover, but it wouldn't be enough if the man followed them. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest as she pressed her back against the tree, holding Lily close. "Stay quiet, Lily," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We have to stay very quiet." Lily nodded, though her small body trembled with fear. Eleanor could feel her rapid heartbeat through their shared touch, and it broke her heart. No child should ever have to feel this kind of terror. For a few agonizing moments, they waited in the silence of the trees. Eleanor strained her ears, listening for any sign that the man had followed them, her heart racing with every passing second. And then she heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching through the fallen leaves. He was close. Too close. Eleanor's breath hitched, and she instinctively tightened her grip on Lily. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until Eleanor could almost feel the man's presence on the other side of the tree. Her entire body went rigid with fear, every nerve screaming at her to do something, anything, to protect Lily. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. Silence hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Eleanor dared not move, dared not breathe. Was he still there? Was he waiting, listening, just as they were? For what felt like an eternity, they remained frozen in place, the only sound the distant laughter of children playing on the other side of the park. And then, just as suddenly as the footsteps had stopped, they resumed, fading away, moving in the opposite direction. Eleanor's shoulders sagged with relief, though her heart continued to pound in her chest. The man hadn't found them, at least not yet, but she knew they weren't safe, not until the police arrived. She slowly peeked around the tree, her eyes scanning the park. The man was walking away, his back turned to them. But Eleanor wasn't fooled. He wasn't giving up. He was circling, biding his time, waiting for another opportunity. "We need to keep moving," Eleanor whispered to Lily. "Come on, sweetheart, just a little longer." They emerged from the trees, making their way toward the edge of the park where Eleanor hoped the police would soon arrive. But as they hurried along the path, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that the man was still watching them, still waiting. Every step felt like a race against fear, and Eleanor knew that their time was running out. A moment of resolve. Eleanor's legs ached with every step, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she clutched Lily's trembling hand. They had been weaving through the park, trying to keep a low profile while staying in motion. She had hoped to spot a police car arriving, lights flashing in a beacon of hope. But so far, there was no sign of help. Time seemed to stretch, every minute feeling longer than the last. Lily's small voice broke the silence. "Why? Why won't he leave us alone?" Eleanor squeezed her hand gently, wishing she had an answer that would make sense to the terrified child. "Sometimes people hurt others because they don't know how to love, Lily," she said softly. "But it doesn't mean it's your fault, and it doesn't mean you deserve it." Lily's lips quivered, her wide eyes searching Eleanor's face for reassurance. "He hurt my mom. A lot. And now he's looking for me." Eleanor's heart twisted painfully. She wanted to gather Lily in her arms and shield her from every dark memory and every terrifying thought. The world was too cruel for a child this young to have already experienced such fear and pain. But there was no time for comforting words, no time for promises that everything would be all right when Eleanor wasn't sure herself how this would end. A quick glance over her shoulder confirmed her worst fear. The man was still following them. His stride was casual, but relentless, like a wolf stalking its prey. The distance between them wasn't shrinking quickly, but Eleanor could feel the threat, like a storm cloud building on the horizon. She couldn't run much longer, not at her age, and certainly not with Lily clinging to her side. She looked around frantically, hoping to find someone who could help. The few people in the park seemed too far away, lost in their own worlds. A young couple sat on a picnic blanket near the pond, laughing as they fed each other strawberries. Two teenagers were skateboarding near the playground, oblivious to everything but their tricks. No one had noticed them, and even if they had, Eleanor doubted anyone would understand the gravity of the situation. They reached a narrow path leading toward a small grove of trees at the edge of the park, and Eleanor made a split-second decision. She led Lily off the main path, hoping the trees would provide some cover while they figured out their next move. Her mind raced. The police would be here soon. At least, she prayed they would. But until then, she had to keep Lily safe. Somehow, as they ducked behind a large oak tree, Eleanor crouched down, pulling Lily into her arms. She was shaking, whether from fear, exhaustion, or both. Eleanor wasn't sure. She stroked the girl's hair softly, her thoughts whirling in a storm of fear and determination. "Lily, listen to me," Eleanor said, her voice barely a whisper. "I need you to be very brave right now. The police are coming, but until they get here, we need to stay hidden. Can you do that for me?" Lily nodded, though her eyes were still wide with fear. "What if he finds us?" Eleanor swallowed hard. She wished she could tell the girl that everything would be fine, that no one would hurt her, but the truth was far too dangerous to sugarcoat. "If he finds us, we'll still be okay," Eleanor said firmly. "I'm not going to let him take you. I won't let him hurt you, I promise." Lily stared up at her, searching her face for any sign of doubt. Eleanor's heart ached for the child. She didn't know how long she could keep that promise, but she would try. No matter what, she would try. They sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, the sound of their shallow breaths filling the space between them. Eleanor kept one eye on the park, scanning for any sign of movement. The trees around them swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves rustling softly. For a moment, it almost felt peaceful. And then she saw him. The man had stopped near the edge of the trees, his eyes scanning the park, as if he knew they were close. His movements were slow, calculated, as though he were savoring the hunt. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. He was getting closer, too close. "Stay down, Lily," Eleanor whispered, her heart racing. "Don't make a sound." Lily nodded, her small hands gripping Eleanor's cardigan tightly. Eleanor held her breath, watching as the man walked closer, his gaze sweeping over the trees. He hadn't seen them yet, but he was only a few yards away. She could see his face now, hardened, cold, and unfeeling. His jaw was clenched, his eyes sharp with a cruel focus. A rush of fear surged through Eleanor's veins, but along with it came something else, something stronger. She had spent most of her life avoiding conflict, keeping to herself, letting the world move around her without interfering. But this was different. This child needed her, and there was no one else. No one else to fight for her. A steely resolve settled in Eleanor's chest. She wasn't a young woman anymore, but she had lived through enough to know that some things were worth fighting for. Lily was one of those things. The man was getting closer. She could see the tension in his posture, the determination in his eyes. He wasn't going to stop until he found Lily, and Eleanor couldn't let that happen. Her mind raced, searching for a plan. She needed to distract him, to draw him away from Lily long enough for the police to arrive. But how? She wasn't sure she had the strength to confront him directly, not physically. And yet, the alternative, doing nothing, was unthinkable. Eleanor's gaze darted around the grove, searching for anything she could use. A fallen branch lay nearby, its rough bark covered in moss. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. She reached for it, her hand shaking slightly as she gripped the branch. "Lily," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I need you to stay here. Don't move, no matter what. Do you understand?" Lily looked up at her, her eyes wide with fear. "What are you going to do?" Eleanor forced a reassuring smile, though her heart was pounding in her chest. "I'm going to distract him. I'll be right back." Before Lily could protest, Eleanor stood up, her body tense with both fear and determination. The man hadn't seen her yet. He was still scanning the trees, his back turned to her. It was now or never. With the branch held firmly in her hands, Eleanor stepped out from behind the tree. Her legs shook, but she moved with purpose, her eyes locked on the man. She wasn't sure what she was going to do. She only knew that she had to draw his attention away from Lily. "Hey." Eleanor's voice rang out, surprising even herself with its strength. The man whipped around, his eyes narrowing as they locked onto her. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them was thick with tension, the weight of unspoken threats hanging in the balance. "What do you want, old woman?" The man sneered, taking a step closer. "This doesn't concern you." Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest, but she stood her ground, her grip tightening on the branch. "You're not taking that child," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "I won't let you." The man laughed, a cold, cruel sound that sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine. "And what are you going to do about it?" he asked, taking another step toward her. "You think you can stop me?" Eleanor swallowed hard, her mind racing. She didn't know if she could stop him, but she had to try. She had to buy enough time for the police to arrive, enough time to keep Lily safe. "I don't have to stop you," Eleanor said, her voice steady. "I just have to keep you away from her long enough for the police to get here." The man's eyes darkened, his sneer fading into a snarl. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he growled, taking another step toward her. "But you're just an old woman. I could break you in half if I wanted to." Eleanor's heart raced, but she refused to back down. "Maybe you could," she said, her voice low and determined. "But I'm not going to let you hurt that little girl. Not today." The man took another step closer, his eyes narrowing with fury. Eleanor's grip tightened on the branch, her mind racing with possibilities. She didn't have much time. She had to act fast. And then, just as the man lunged toward her, the sound of sirens filled the air. Relief flooded through Eleanor's veins as she heard the police cars approaching. The man hesitated, his eyes darting toward the sound. For a brief moment, his confidence faltered. "You're done," Eleanor said, her voice firm. The man's eyes flicked back to her, filled with rage. But he knew it was over. With one last furious glare, he turned and sprinted in the opposite direction, disappearing into the trees. Eleanor stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. And then she dropped the branch, her hands shaking with both relief and exhaustion. "Lily," she whispered, turning back toward the tree where the girl was hiding. Healing wounds." Eleanor's legs wobbled as she leaned against the large oak, the surge of adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation quickly draining from her body. Her mind buzzed, a jumble of relief, fear, and lingering disbelief that the man had finally given up and fled. The echo of the police sirens grew louder, and she could see the flashing blue and red lights approaching from the park's entrance. Help was almost here. But Eleanor wasn't thinking about herself. Her mind snapped back to Lily, who was still huddled behind the tree. As soon as she regained her breath, Eleanor hurried over and knelt down beside the frightened child. "Lily," she whispered softly, gently touching the girl's shoulder. "It's okay, sweetheart. It's over. The police are here." Lily looked up, her tear-streaked face reflecting both fear and confusion. Her small body trembled, as if the tension and terror of the past hour had drained the last of her strength. She stared at Eleanor for a moment, then threw her arms around the elderly woman, burying her face in Eleanor's cardigan. Eleanor held her tightly, feeling the girl's sobs rack her tiny frame. "You're safe now, Lily," she murmured, stroking the child's hair. "You're safe. No one's going to hurt you anymore." But Eleanor knew those words, comforting as they might be, couldn't erase the deep scars that fear and trauma had already carved into Lily's heart. The physical threat might be gone for now, but the emotional wounds remained raw, like fresh cuts. The flashing lights of the police cars filled the park, casting long shadows through the trees as the officers arrived. Two uniformed officers, a man and a woman, quickly approached, their expressions focused but calm. The female officer knelt down next to them, her gentle smile meant to reassure both Eleanor and Lily. "Are you two okay?" she asked softly, her gaze shifting between the elderly woman and the young girl. Eleanor nodded, still holding Lily close. "We're fine now," she said, her voice quieter than she expected. "But she's been through a lot. There was a man. He's been following us. He tried to take her." The male officer's expression hardened, and he immediately radioed the information into dispatch. "Can you describe the man? What he looked like, what he was wearing?" he asked Eleanor, his voice steady and professional, but there was a clear urgency in his tone. "He was tall, wearing a black jacket. His hair was short, dark," Eleanor said, her mind replaying the tense moments when the man had been so close. "He looked angry, dangerous." The female officer nodded, her eyes softening as she looked at Lily. "We'll do everything we can to find him. We've already got more units patrolling the area." She turned back to Eleanor. "And you, are you sure you're okay? That was incredibly brave, what you did." Eleanor blinked, surprised by the compliment. Brave? She hadn't felt brave. She had been terrified. Every moment of that encounter had filled her with dread, the fear of what might happen if she failed. But she had done what she had to. I didn't have a choice," she murmured, her voice catching in her throat. "I had to protect her." The officer smiled warmly. "And you did. You did a great job." Just then, another car arrived, and from it emerged a woman in her mid-30s, her face a mask of worry and relief. Her blonde hair was disheveled, and there was a frantic energy in her steps as she approached. "Mom!" Lily cried, breaking away from Eleanor's embrace and rushing into her mother's open arms. The two clung to each other, Lily sobbing into her mother's chest as the woman smoothed her hair, whispering reassurances through her tears. "Oh, my baby, my sweet girl, I'm so sorry. I'm here now." "I'm so sorry," the woman murmured, her voice trembling as she kissed the top of Lily's head over and over. "I'm never letting you out of my sight again." Eleanor stood to the side, watching the reunion with a bittersweet ache in her heart. She was glad that Lily was back in her mother's arms, where she'd longed, but the intensity of their emotions reminded her of the absence in her own life. The children she had once held close, the grandchildren she hardly ever saw. She felt an unexpected pang of loneliness amidst the relief. The female officer gently guided Eleanor a few steps away to ask more questions, but her eyes kept drifting back to the little girl and her mother, huddled together in an embrace that seemed like it would never break. The intensity of their bond tugged at Eleanor's heartstrings, reminding her of something she hadn't felt in a long time: the fierce, protective love a mother has for her child. Lily's mother, Jessica, as Eleanor later learned, was understandably shaken, her voice quivering as she spoke with the officers. She explained how she had been hiding from the man, how they had fled their home in fear after weeks of escalating threats. He had been her partner once, but he had turned violent. She had tried to escape, to find safety for her daughter, but no matter how far she ran, the man seemed to find them. He just wouldn't stop, Jessica said, her voice thick with emotion as she held Lily close. "I thought if we moved again, if I kept my distance, we'd be safe, but he always found a way." Eleanor's heart broke for them both. She had seen women like Jessica before, mothers trying to shield their children from men who believed they had a right to control and hurt them. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. And yet it was all too common. "I'm so sorry," Eleanor said quietly, stepping forward. "I wish there was more I could have done." Jessica looked up, her eyes red but filled with gratitude. "You saved my daughter," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You kept her safe when I couldn't. I don't even know how to thank you." Eleanor shook her head, feeling the lump in her throat. "You don't need to thank me. I just did what anyone would have done." But Jessica's gaze remained steady. "Not everyone would have put themselves in harm's way like you did. You didn't have to protect her, but you did. You're a hero." The word felt too heavy for Eleanor to carry. She wasn't a hero. She was just an old woman who had been in the right place at the right time. And yet, looking at Lily's tear-streaked face, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she had made a difference. A real, tangible difference in this little girl's life. Maybe she had given Lily something she desperately needed. A reminder that there were still good people in the world, people who would stand up for her, protect her, and love her, even when the darkness threatened to overwhelm. As the police officers escorted Jessica and Lily to a waiting car, taking them somewhere safe, far from the reach of the man who had haunted their lives for so long, Eleanor stood alone for a moment, watching the mother and daughter disappear into the protective bubble of law enforcement. The park, which had been the setting for so much fear and tension, now felt strangely empty. The weight of the events began to settle in Eleanor's bones, and she sank back onto the bench she had started her day on, feeling the cool wood beneath her hands. The pigeons were still pecking at the ground, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded around them. For a long time, Eleanor sat in silence, her mind swirling with thoughts. The park had always been a place of refuge for her, a place where she could escape her own loneliness and watch the world pass by. But today had been different. Today, the park had become the stage for a battle she never expected to fight. And somehow, Despite the fear and uncertainty, she had come out on the other side. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the grass, Eleanor felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but today, at least, she had done something that mattered. And that, she realized, was enough. The unseen battles. The next few days passed in a haze for Eleanor. The incident in the park seemed both distant and vivid, replaying in her mind in snippets. The sound of Lily's terrified voice, the looming presence of the man, the feel of the branch in her trembling hands. She had saved the girl, that much was clear, but the emotions swirling inside her were more complex than just relief. She couldn't shake the image of Lily's small, scared face or the desperate look in her mother's eyes. Their story, their suffering, had imprinted itself on her soul. Eleanor had been alone for so long, wrapped in the quiet rhythms of her solitary life, that she had almost forgotten what it was like to be needed, to have someone rely on her, even if only for a fleeting moment. The experience had stirred something deep within her, something she hadn't felt in years. It was a mixture of responsibility, purpose, and even, dare she admit it, hope. She spent the days after the incident sitting on her favorite park bench. As usual, feeding the birds, but her mind wasn't on the gentle flutter of wings or the crisp autumn air. Her thoughts kept drifting to Lily and Jessica. Were they okay? Had the police found the man? Did they feel safe now? The questions haunted her, and though she tried to push them away, they refused to leave her in peace. On the third day after the incident, as she sat beneath the familiar oak tree, scattering seeds for the pigeons, Eleanor's phone rang. The sound startled her. She wasn't used to getting calls, especially not during her quiet moments in the park. Fumbling with the old flip phone, she pressed it to her ear. "Hello," she said, her voice tentative. "Miss Eleanor." The voice on the other end was warm and familiar. It was Officer Harris, the kind female police officer who had helped them in the park that day. "Yes, this is Eleanor," she replied, her heart quickening with both curiosity and apprehension. Why was the officer calling her now? "I hope I'm not disturbing you," Officer Harris said. "I just wanted to give you an update about the case. We've arrested the man who was after Lily and her mother. He was found 2 towns over, trying to book a motel room under a false name. He's in custody now, and he won't be able to hurt them anymore." Eleanor let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Relief washed over her like a warm wave. "Thank you for letting me know," she said softly. "I've been so worried about them." "I thought you might be," Officer Harris continued. "And there's more good news. Lily and her mother are doing well. They're staying in a safe house for now, while the legal proceedings move forward. But Jessica, Lily's mother, wanted me to pass along a message." Eleanor's heart thudded in her chest. A message. From them. She hadn't expected that. "Jessica wanted to say thank you," Officer Harris said. "She said she doesn't know how to repay you for what you did. She was afraid you might not realize how much of a difference you made. She called you a guardian angel." Eleanor's throat tightened at the words. A guardian angel. The idea of it felt strange and foreign, yet deeply moving. She had never thought of herself that way, never considered that her actions could have such a profound impact on someone else's life. She also said, Officer Harris added with a small chuckle, that Lily keeps asking about you. She's been telling everyone at the safe house that you're the bravest person she's ever met. Tears welled up in Eleanor's eyes, and she blinked them away quickly. "That sweet girl," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so glad they're both safe now. That's all that matters." "Would you like to see them?" Officer Harris asked gently. "Jessica mentioned that she'd love for you to visit. She thinks it would mean a lot to Lily. But only if you're comfortable, of course." Eleanor hesitated, her mind swirling with a mix of emotions. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to rush over to the safe house and wrap Lily in a warm embrace. But another part of her, a quieter, more cautious part, held back. What if she wasn't the hero they believed her to be? What if seeing them again reopened wounds she wasn't sure how to handle? "I don't know," Eleanor said finally, her voice uncertain. "I'm not sure if it's the right thing. I just did what anyone would have done." "Not everyone would have done what you did," Officer Harris replied, her tone firm but kind. "You saved that little girl's life, Miss Eleanor. You were her lifeline in a moment of darkness. And now she wants to see the person who made her feel safe again." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She thought back to the moment when she had first seen Lily approaching her in the park, the fear in her eyes, the way she had clung to her like a lifeline. She had made a promise to protect her then, and somehow, against all odds, she had kept that promise. "I'll think about it," Eleanor said softly. "Thank you for calling, Officer Harris." "You take your time," the officer replied gently. "Just know that the invitation is always open. And if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out." After hanging up the phone, Eleanor sat in silence for a long time, her mind replaying the conversation. She thought about Lily, about the way the girl had looked at her with such trust and hope. She thought about Jessica, the young mother who had been through so much, and the quiet strength she had shown in the face of unimaginable fear. The more Eleanor thought about it, the more she realized how much she wanted to see them again. Not out of a sense of obligation, but because she cared. She had connected with them in a way she hadn't expected, and that connection had stayed with her long after the danger had passed. But beneath that desire was another emotion, one Eleanor hadn't expected: fear. She was afraid of what seeing them again might mean. Afraid that she would fail them somehow, that she wouldn't live up to the image they had of her. The days continued to pass in a blur, each one blending into the next. Eleanor went through the motions of her daily routine, feeding the birds, walking through the park, but her heart wasn't in it. She was distracted, her thoughts constantly returning to Lily and Jessica, to the invitation that had been extended to her. One afternoon, as she sat on her usual bench, a small voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me, ma'am." Eleanor looked up, startled, and found herself staring into the face of a young woman. She was in her mid-20s with short, curly hair and a warm smile. She was holding a small bouquet of flowers in her hands. "Yes?" Eleanor said, her voice tinged with surprise. The woman smiled and held out the flowers. "These are for you." Eleanor blinked, confused. "For me? But why?" The woman chuckled softly. "You're Miss Eleanor, aren't you? The one who saved that little girl in the park a few days ago." Eleanor felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Well, yes, but I didn't do anything special." The woman's smile widened. "You did more than you realize. I'm Jessica's sister. She wanted me to bring these to you as a thank you. She said you were their guardian angel." Eleanor stared at the flowers, a lump forming in her throat. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected any of it. "They're safe now," the woman continued, her voice soft and sincere. "And that's because of you." Tears welled up in Eleanor's eyes as she accepted the flowers, her hands trembling slightly. She had done something good, something that mattered. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The woman smiled again. "No, thank you." As she walked away, leaving Eleanor alone with the flowers, the elderly woman sat in silence, overwhelmed by a flood of emotions. She had spent so long feeling invisible, like her life no longer had any real meaning or purpose. But now, for the first time in years, she felt seen. She felt needed. And that, more than anything, was what truly mattered. The courage to begin again. Eleanor stood in front of the small, nondescript house, clutching the bouquet of flowers she had brought with her. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from age, but from nerves. She had debated this moment for days, going back and forth in her mind, wondering if it was the right thing to do. But now, standing here on the doorstep of the safe house where Jessica and Lily were staying, she knew there was no turning back. The house looked ordinary enough. A 2-story home in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place that didn't draw attention. That was the point, of course. It was meant to be a refuge, a hiding place, somewhere no one would think to look. But as Eleanor stood there, the significance of this simple home weighed on her. It was more than just a house. It was a fortress, a shelter protecting those inside from the dangers that lurked beyond its walls. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. It was strange to feel this nervous. She had faced down a dangerous man in the park without flinching. But now, standing on this porch, her heart raced as if she were the one in danger. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorbell. But then, she reminded herself why she was here. For Lily. For Jessica. With a determined push, she pressed the doorbell. The sound echoed inside, and for a brief moment, Eleanor considered turning around and leaving. But before she could act on the thought, the door swung open, and there stood Jessica. Her face lit up with a mixture of surprise and joy as she saw Eleanor standing there. "Miss Eleanor," Jessica exclaimed, her eyes wide. "I can't believe you're here." Eleanor smiled, though her heart was still racing. "I wasn't sure if I should come," she admitted, her voice soft. "But I wanted to see how you and Lily were doing." Jessica's face softened, and she stepped aside, gesturing for Eleanor to come in. "Please come in. We're so happy to see you." Eleanor stepped into the house, her eyes adjusting to the soft lighting. The interior was simple but cozy, with comfortable furniture and a few personal touches scattered around. A framed photo on a side table, a blanket draped over the couch. It felt like a home, despite the temporary nature of the safe house. As Eleanor walked further inside, she heard a familiar voice call out from the living room. "Is that Miss Eleanor?" Eleanor turned to see Lily running toward her, her face lighting up with pure joy. The little girl flung herself into Eleanor's arms, hugging her tightly, as if she never wanted to let go. "Miss Eleanor," Lily said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "You came. You really came." Eleanor's heart melted as she held the girl close, feeling the warmth of her small body against hers. She had been so afraid of this moment, worried that she wouldn't know what to say or how to act. But in Lily's embrace, all her doubts melted away. The connection they had forged in the park had not been broken. If anything, it had grown stronger. "I missed you, Lily," Eleanor said softly, stroking the girl's hair. "I'm so glad to see you." Lily pulled back, her eyes shining with happiness. "I missed you too. I've been telling everyone about you. You're my hero." Eleanor chuckled, though her heart ached with emotion. "I'm just glad you're okay, sweetheart. That's all that matters." Jessica watched them with a smile, her eyes misty. "You have no idea how much it means to us that you came," she said quietly. "Lily's been talking about you nonstop, and I've been wanting to thank you properly, face to face." Eleanor shook her head, feeling a bit overwhelmed by the praise. "There's no need to thank me. I just did what anyone would have done." Jessica stepped forward, her expression serious but kind. "No, Miss Eleanor, not everyone would have done what you did. You saved my daughter's life. You saved our lives. That's something I'll never be able to repay." Eleanor's throat tightened as she looked between Jessica and Lily. The weight of their gratitude felt heavy on her shoulders, but it was a weight she was willing to bear. She had spent so many years feeling invisible, wondering if her life had any real purpose left. And now, here she was, standing in the middle of a family that saw her as a hero. It was almost too much to take in. They sat down together in the living room, and for the next hour, they talked. Jessica told Eleanor about the progress they had made in their case against the man who had been stalking them. He was facing multiple charges now, and though the legal process was slow, the authorities had assured them that he would not be able to harm them again. For the first time in months, Jessica and Lily felt a sense of safety, a fragile, delicate safety, but safety nonetheless. Lily, meanwhile, chattered happily about everything and nothing, her innocent joy filling the room. She talked about her favorite shows, her love of animals, and how she wanted to grow up to be brave, just like Miss Eleanor. Every word made Eleanor's heart swell a little more. But as the afternoon wore on, the conversation turned to deeper, more difficult subjects. Jessica confided in Eleanor about the fear that still gripped her, the trauma that lingered despite the man's absence. "It's hard," Jessica admitted, her voice low as she stared at her hands. "Every time I hear a car drive by or see someone looking at us for too long, I feel that panic rising in my chest. I keep telling myself we're safe now, but it's not that simple. The fear doesn't just go away." Eleanor nodded, understanding more than she had expected to. She had never been in Jessica's exact position, but she knew what it felt like to carry the weight of fear and loneliness. She knew what it was like to have scars that couldn't be seen. "It takes time," Eleanor said softly. "And even then, some of that fear might never fully go away. But you're stronger than you think, Jessica. You've already survived so much." Jessica looked up, her eyes meeting Eleanor's. "How did you do it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How did you get through everything you've been through?" Eleanor thought for a moment, her mind drifting back to the years of solitude she had endured. The loss of her husband, the distance between her and her children, the quiet, lonely days that had stretched on and on. She had survived, yes, but had she truly lived? "I'm not sure I have all the answers," Eleanor said slowly. "But what I've learned is that you can't do it alone. I tried for so long to be strong on my own, to keep everything bottled up inside. But that's not the way. You need people around you, people who care about you, who will help carry the burden when it gets too heavy." Jessica nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "You're right," she whispered. "I've been trying to do it all on my own for so long. I didn't want to burden anyone else, but I can't keep going like this." Eleanor reached across the table and took Jessica's hand in hers. "You're not alone anymore," she said gently. "You have Lily. And now you have me too." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Jessica just stared at Eleanor, as if trying to comprehend the depth of the offer. Then, slowly, a smile broke through her tears. "Thank you," Jessica whispered. "Thank you for everything." Later that evening, as Eleanor walked home from the safe house, the cool evening air wrapped around her like a comforting embrace. The sky was painted with hues of pink and orange as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt something stir within her, a sense of belonging, of purpose. She had spent so long drifting through life, feeling like a spectator on the sidelines. But now, she had been given a chance to step back into the world, to make a difference, to form connections that mattered. The fear that had once gripped her heart had loosened its hold, replaced by something far more powerful: hope. Hope for Lily, for Jessica, and even for herself. Eleanor had always believed that her best days were behind her, that the chapters of her life had already been written. But now, she realized that her story wasn't over. There were still new beginnings waiting for her, still pages left to be filled. As she reached the door to her small apartment, Eleanor paused, looking up at the darkening sky. A soft smile played on her lips as she whispered to herself, "Maybe it's never too late to start again." With that, she stepped inside, ready to embrace whatever the future had in store.